We're bringing to the platform now our legend, which is Miss Gwen Ragsdale, who has a fantastic new museum right on the 5500 block of Germantown. She's going to give you a great presentation. So sit back, buckle up your seats, folks, and let's go. It's Juneteenth, everyone.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, lest we forget, Museum of Slavery is located 5501 Germantown Avenue. We're the only slavery museum in Philadelphia. We're also the only museum with an extensive collection of slavery artifacts, meaning shackles, branding irons, manacles, chains. These are what was forced on our ancestors who were held in the bottom of these slave ships for 2 to 3 months. It took 2 to 3 months to get from Africa to the Americas. Imagine being chained down like that. Once you see these items, you get a real opportunity to understand that we have come from some mighty strong people. To think that anybody survived this is amazing. Yet we did. Yet we did. So before we even get to Juneteenth, we have to realize who we were before we even got here. One of the questions that I was asked to respond to was, what were enslaved African people doing before the announcement? Or what were enslaved people thinking once the troops arrived? Well, first of all, when they first came upon these slaves, they were minding their own damn business. They were toiling the land, all right, which is what they had been forced to do for 400 years, all right? When the troops arrived, they had no idea what was going on. It took the Union troops some time to get from the South into Texas. That was the furthest point where the enslaved people were kept. Now, Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. So they started freeing the slaves along the eastern coast because they were the ones closest to where the Civil War was held. But those enslaved Africans in Texas had no idea that they were about to be freed. Now just imagine, you were born into slavery, yet you were held in slavery for much longer than you needed to be. So just imagine, you were held there longer than 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 months, 2 years, 2 years before they actually told you were free. I'm sure at first they were probably shocked. And what did freedom mean? Freedom to do what? Freedom to go where? They didn't even know what freedom was like. Remember, these people were born into slavery. What did it mean to be free? Many of them didn't know where to go. In the South, they actually remained on the plantations that they had been enslaved on all those years. You were you were a slave on Sunday and free on Monday. Again, free to do what? So once they were freed, many of them were just overjoyed. Overjoyed. In fact, they call it Jubilee Day in Texas. Now, many of them immediately started making plans to leave the country. Some of them went into Canada. Some of them even went back to Africa during the liberation, back to Liberia. However, how did we live? We lived as people of bondage, beasts of burdens. That's how we lived. I was also asked to respond to some of the remedies that they had, and there were some remedies that we still have in our community today, all right? Some of the women, because they were constantly being raped, started using some of the herbs that they found in the areas where they lived, and they would cover their bodies and their genitals with these herbs and these potions that just make themselves smell bad, all right, so that they wouldn't be touched. Not sure if it worked, but they would do anything to just save their dignity, just saving their dignity. I was given something that I think is important that I want to read to you about what the first Juneteenth looked like. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existed between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are to remain, they are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Now, what I get from this is that they were told, yes, you're free, but don't get carried away, all right? Understand that we are still in charge. So even though they were freed, the level of oppression was still there. In fact, what it means is they kept their knee on your neck. You could not even come together. If a group of blacks were seen together, they saw that as, a seditious act. You might be arrested. And remember, to be arrested during slavery meaning they could throw you back into slavery. So there was no way these people felt what true freedom meant like, what it felt to be a true slave. So again, it's just important to remember that though June 19th, 1865 marked the date that slaves were freed, we still didn't feel the level of freedom. Still didn't feel the level of freedom. And I have to say that in our museum, we talk about slavery from the beginning. We talk about the capture, the emancipation, the Jim Crow era, Reconstruction, and beyond. Beyond meaning current events. Current events. Today, we see a revolution starting where droves of diverse groups of people who have been marching for the last month or so in protest of the deaths at the hands of white police officers. To me, I find this amazing. I grew up in the civil rights movement. I marched during the civil rights movement. But most of the people I marched with were people who looked like me. Yes, there was a smattering of whites, but now many of the groups, they're mostly whites and Asian and other ethnic groups. So I truly, truly believe that we're at a point when something has to change. Something must change. And that galvanizing point where people were forced to watch George Floyd being choked out by that white police officer who had his knee on his neck for 8 minutes, close to 9 minutes, really struck a chord. So many of these young people who grew up not really realizing that there was much of a difference because they grew up with black friends, but they had no idea that their friends were being treated differently than they were. Blacks have to teach their children in the same way slaves had to teach their children how to act around white people. Slave children were told, mind the master, do what you're told, all right? In the same way, we have to tell our boys, when you're confronted with a white police officer, don't move abruptly. I tell a quick story about my youngest son, who has a PhD from Cornell University. He worked for a major international company, made a 6-figure salary, bought himself a Porsche. He could afford it, but he got tired of getting stopped by police officers who assumed he was a drug dealer. One time he got stopped on the Jersey Turnpike, and he was so used to getting stopped that he held his hand outside the door. He had his registration and license in one hand and his keys in the other. When the officer ordered him out of the car, he opened the door from the outside and just stood there with his things in his hands. The officer came up on him and slapped the keys out of his hand. But when my son went to pick them up, the officer stood on the back of his hand. He said all he could do was hear my voice saying, be cool, and just waited to feel a bullet shoot in the back of his head. And he kept thinking how sad my mother's going to be at the funeral. Our children should not have to live like that. We should not have to tell our children what to expect. They should not be treated any differently than any white person. I'm in my 70s, and do you know I still get profiled when I go to some of the stores? What is it about me that makes them think that I would steal? The only thing I could think of is the color of my skin. So I want our white allies to realize, and I think they do, all we want is equality. That's it, equality. Don't treat me any different than you would your sister, your brother, or want to be treated like you are today. So again, while we celebrate Juneteenth, recognize that things are changing. I'm so glad to be here at the Johnson House and have participated in past Juneteenth events. And I'm sure next year it's going to be even bigger and better. And God willing, I'll be here for that one as well. Again, please come and visit the Lest We Forget Slavery Museum. We're located at 5501 Germantown Avenue. We do require appointments, so you can go and book appointment on our website, which is www.lwf as in forget, S as in slavery, museum.com, or you could call or text 215-205-4324. And it's important to recognize that we must remember the legacy of slavery, lest we forget. Thank you so much for this opportunity.